So Nigeria's leading commodities market player, AFEX, has unveiled its annual commodities outlook report for 2023. The report says that the impact of flooding, devaluation of the naira, high logistics costs, and the socio-political situation in Nigeria will keep commodity prices at historically high levels amid concerns of an impending food crisis and a global recession. Fleshing up that report for me now is Oluwafunto Olasemo. She is the Vice President in charge of the financial markets at AFEX. We thank you for making it here tonight, madam.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. It's good to have you. We appreciate this report, but I want you to walk me through the highlights of this report.
Okay, thank you very much for having me on this program. But before I begin to touch on the highlight of the 2023 annual outlook, I think it's worthy to just touch base with the major events that happened in 2022, right? So if we look at the first half of 2022, the Russia-Ukraine war took the world by surprise, and what that did was to put a lot of pressure on the supply of major commodities like the wheat, fertilizer, and energy. So we saw high prices in the price I surge in the price of these commodities. Towards the second half of the year, the price is kind of moderated, but there was also global slowdown of the economy, and so those prices were still higher than the 5-year average prices. So throughout the year, we saw prices of commodities higher than the average for 2022. Also in 2022, we also saw climate change having its worst part its worst impact on most countries. Nigeria, for instance, we have very devastating flood. In some part of the world, there was also drought, which put pressure on the total available commodities that are being supplied into the market. We also saw a number of economy also shutting down, businesses shutting down due to high cost of import. Now, going into 2023, what the outlook tends to look at is the effect of this 2022 begin to materialize in 2023. So we would see a pressure or an upward pressure on the prices of commodity due to reduced production in volume. We also have that lingering infrastructure issue in Nigeria, where we have lots of post-harvest losses. All of this would impact the cost of food, just like we've had in 2022, where we had 9 consecutive increase in food inflation. Yeah, so those are the highlights.
I'm just wondering what the realities are right now on the ground for Nigeria when you talk about our stocks and our production of the basic grains, rice, maize, millet, which are the staples, as it were, for us. So
the simple way I like to put that is I like to look at the annual growth in population compared to the annual growth in production. So our population grew at an average of 2% annually, and our crop production grows at about 1.8%, meaning that the population is growing faster than we are producing food. Then coupled with the event of high cost of input, the flooding and the rest of them, what we're seeing that's going to happen, or the reality on ground, is we do not have enough food to feed ourselves. We already have a food system that is weakened, and this is going to be further weakened by the event of 2022. Take, for instance, in the total output of maize, for instance, reduced by about 14%. So we barely produce about 10 million metric tons, whereas the total consumption required is about 17 to 20 million metric tons. So there's a deficit of about 30 to 50% in maize. Also on the paddy rice, there was about 22% decrease in the volume of the output. For sorghum, soybean, and other commodities, the reduction in production was between 6 to 14%, depending on the commodity. So at the end of the day, what we would see is that there'll be lots of food scarcity in the market.
I'm just trying to find out if there are quick wins. How do we mitigate this? So we can't continue to import.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. In the short term, we would all feel the impact of the deficit in production. However, we need to be very creative about innovative products and technology that would unlock funding from the capital and the private fund to address this funding gap. Take, for instance, at AFEX, we try to solve problems like access to finance, storage facility, as well as access to market. So we need innovative products that would provide quality input to the producers at reasonable prices. This would allow them to produce at cheaper price, which ultimately would increase productivity and reduce the ultimate cost to the consumer. Also, we need to reduce our post-harvest losses. There's a lot of investment that still needs to go into infrastructure. We keep paying lip service to this, but it's high time that we began to do serious implementation of these policies in building our infrastructure to increase productivity.
So where do you think the biggest problem really is in terms of interventions in the Nigeria's agriculture, farming, whatever space? Where's the missing link here? What do we need to put in there to make sure that we can increase local production? Because we've got the arable land.
Absolutely.
So if you take out climate change and a few other vulnerabilities like that, we still have enough space to farm, but we just can't get enough of food at affordable cost, as it were, to the man on the street.
So if we look at, again, I agree with you, the arable land. Nigeria has about 74 million arable land. 50%, less than 50%, 74 million arable land. Wow. 74 million hectares of arable land.
Wow.
Less than 50% of that is being cultivated. Less than 2% of what is being cultivated is being irrigated. So there is that huge infrastructure gap. We are heavily reliant on wet season or the rainy season for cultivation. And as one of my colleagues did mention, what crops need is not rain, it is water. So it is more of infrastructure gap than the rain itself. So if we can fix infrastructure gap that allows us to produce all year round, the gap in production
so we need to stop thinking that rain is just what we need.
No, rain is not what we need.
That's the whole way of thinking. You're telling me it's all the way of thinking of
absolutely.
Agriculture.
So look at what excess rain cost. It cost flooding, and we lost over 640,000 hectares. Livestock, last year, absolutely. And this is why we find ourselves in the problem that we are in today. Agriculture or crops, what they need is water.
So we can't just keep saying send down the rain.
Absolutely.
We could just have to start
so when we keep saying send down the rain, we are just doing vibe, inshallah, and blood of Jesus. The real thing is closing the infrastructure gap that exists within the value chain so that we can produce all year round.
When I see AFEX name and I see you folks in Uganda recently, and I'm wondering what's the footprint? What are you doing down there in Uganda?
So AFEX, we have a vision of being the reference point for commodities in Africa, and we do believe that Africa has the ability to feed itself. Over the next 5 years, we have a Pan-African expansion strategy where we want to have operations in 10 African countries. As of today, we have operation in 3 African countries, Nigeria, Kenya, Uganda being the latest. As you know, Uganda is the breadbasket of Africa, and they have lots of, their commodities market is extremely dynamic with very good potential for growth. For instance, unlike Nigeria, where it's a one rain season activity, they have 2 raining seasons, meaning they could potentially produce twice in a year. The temperature in Uganda supports a lot of commodities, so it gives them the ability to produce varieties of commodity, which also then ultimately increase the output of the country. So for us at AFEX, because of the Pan-African expansion and knowing that this is an African decade and Africa can not just feed itself but feed the rest of the world, we are replicating the success that we have in Nigeria and in Kenya to be able to address the problem of smallholder farmers, because the problem of smallholder farmers are peculiar across the country, across the continent actually. So same problem smallholder farmers are facing in Nigeria, in East Africa, in West Africa is the same that they are facing in Uganda. So our expansion into Uganda is to help solve part of the smallholder farmers problem and help African feed itself, such as providing assets to input, post-storage harvest losses reduction, and also connecting the producers and the processors of the commodities together in a very transparent way so that we can have distribution of shared prosperity.
I think we're going to touch base with you as we move on into the new year and the rest of the year. Thank you so much for coming here tonight,
Thanks so
madam.
much for
And all the best at AFEX and your Pan-African expansion. Thank you so much.